Before I was a storyteller, I was a school teacher. And my very first teaching assignment was 8th grade English. I just want the sympathy to build before I continue. Oh man, and I was fresh out of teacher college. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had a little clue when I went to Belk's department store to buy a pair of school shoes. And when I checked out, the lady said, are you a teacher? And I said, yeah. And she said, what you going to teach? And I said, 8th grade. And she said, ooh, you about to be baptized by fire. And truer words were never spoken. I had a kid that sat in the back row of my class. To protect his innocence, and more to the point, to give you an idea of what this kid was like, we will call him the Hood. Because that's what he wore every single day of school. Even in the dog days of August, at the very first of school, when it's 105 degrees, he wore a big olive drab parka with the quilting on the inside. He always had it zipped up to his chin and had the hood with the fur all around the edge flipped up. He would sit inside that coat in the last chair in the last row of my English classroom, and he did absolutely nothing. And by the end of the first grading period, which was not real report card time, teachers call it progress report. By the end of the first grading period, when we have just a little check on you to see how you're doing, he was failing everything. So there was a parent-teacher conference. Now, a parent-teacher conference in elementary school is a simple affair. There's the parent and there's the teacher, and they talk. But in middle school, in 8th grade, everybody has a team of teachers, and they gang up on you. So when we asked his mama to come and talk to us, we had a whole phalanx of educators arrayed on one side of a conference table and his mama sitting on the other. There was his PE teacher, there was his guidance counselor, there was me, his English teacher, there was his science teacher, his social studies teacher, his math teacher. And we just started firing salvos. He won't do this, he didn't turn that in, he doesn't pay attention, I caught him going to sleep in my class, on and on, right down the line. And then after we had told her all the problems we were experiencing, the guidance counselor who was facilitating the meeting said, Mrs. Hood, is there anything you'd like to say? She was not from the South, bless her heart. Obviously you are, you know what that means. Yeah. In the American South, you know, we have traditions like you see somebody on the street and you say, how are you? And we say, fine, because we're generally happy people. Your mother could have died Tuesday, but you say, fine, I'm fine. She was not from the South. And when we said, do you have anything to say? We fully expected her to say something like, we're going to work on this. I'm going to whoop up on that boy. But that's not what she said. She told us her whole life story. It was awful. It would not be nice for me to tell you everything that she told us. But the abbreviated version ended with, my husband and I have had a rocky relationship for several years, and this summer, just before school started, he up and left without warning. We have not heard from him in weeks. We really don't expect to ever hear from him again. It devastated my son, and he has tried to commit suicide twice. Well, of course, we all look at the guidance counselor and say, why didn't you tell us any of this? We're riding the boy about spelling tests, and he's got lots of really big issues to deal with. And then she said, I think what he needs is a male role model. Well, that female teacher looked at this female teacher, and that female teacher looked at that female teacher, and that female teacher looked at that female teacher, and they all looked at me. And so I said, what they teach you to say in teacher college. I said, perhaps he would benefit from tutoring. It's all I knew to say. Here's a boy who's trying to kill himself, and I'm going to help him with his homework. But that's all I knew to say. And she grabbed a hold of that like the big fat knot at the very end of her rope. And she said, I think that would be fine. In fact, I work until 5 o'clock every day. School gets out at 3:30, so he can come to your room for 90 minutes every day after school. It's like, great, cancel my social life. Okay, I'm willing to give it a try. And so that afternoon, the Hood came into my empty classroom after the final bell rang, and he sat in his accustomed seat with a whole empty classroom between himself and me. And I said, Hood, we had a very positive conversation with your mom this morning. I was lying my pants off. But I couldn't tell him what had happened. It was just too awful. So I said, we had a very positive conversation with your mom this morning, and she thinks it'd be a good idea, and I agree, if you come here every afternoon for tutoring, and I'll help you out. We'll start with my subject, English, and after we get you going on that and you got a passing grade, we'll move on to math and social studies and science, and maybe by Christmas we'll get you caught up and you won't be doing so bad. What do you think? He turned sideways in his chair so that all I could see was the profile of that big parka coat. But I knew what to do for that. They teach you this. In teacher college, it's called monitor and adjust. So I kind of changed tack and I said, I tell you what, maybe that's too much pressure. How about this? Your mom is not going to pick you up till 5 o'clock every afternoon. So you're going to have to be here. You can't be wandering around the school unsupervised. You're going to have to come to my room. But if you come here and use this like a study hall, I won't bother you. You don't need to bother me. I'll sit up here and do teacher work. You can sit back there and do your homework. And you can get all your homework done every afternoon. You'll never have to take a book home. What do you think of that? He turned all the way around so that all I could see was his back. That just went all over me. I didn't know what else to do. They didn't tell you what to do when your students turn their back on you in teacher college. And I lost my temper and I started yelling. I said, all right, fine. I tried to help you, but you won't even meet me halfway. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get a piece of paper and a pencil out of your book bag. We're going to write down all your assignments and I'm going to write in red ink right next to each one of them. Refuse, so that your mother can have documentation that I tried to help you. Get a piece of paper and a pencil out. He unzipped his book bag, pulled out a piece of paper, then he fished around and he pulled out a pencil. It was broken. He pulled out another pencil. I said, all right, let's start with my class. What are we doing in my class? Journal writing. We had to make the kids write in a journal. Why do you have 8th graders write in a journal? They haven't lived long enough to have anything happen to them, but they have to write their darkest thoughts in a journal. So the teacher's manual gave you all kinds of suggestions, and the journal was for practice writing, really, before they did a big assignment. And we were working on how to write directions, how to write a process. And the teacher's manual said you might want to have boys and girls write different things. It said for girls, you might want to have them write how to bake a cake. And I thought, how to bake a cake? Ain't no girl bakes a cake made from scratch, scratched out of Betty Crocker box. That's all they know how to do. That ain't going to work. And it said, and for boys, they're getting close to the age where they're going to get their driver's license when they enter high school. So maybe you'd like to have them write directions on how to get to their house, and you could write directions on how to drive to your house. And I was like, oh no. No, I do not want these people knowing where I live. That is not going to happen. So I ditched the teacher's manual and I told my class, I said, we're going to write a process, a multi-step process. And I have an idea. It was getting on to Halloween time. And I said, let's write how to play our favorite practical joke or prank. And I told them about all kinds of practical jokes that I had played when I was a teenager. Toilet paper. You might have toilet papered somebody's yard when you were a kid. We took that to an art form. We toilet papered a man's horse one time. Oh, it was fabulous. And if you stretch toilet paper between 2 trees in the curve of a road, at night when somebody comes down that dark, lonely highway and they round the curve and their headlights hit that toilet paper at windshield level, it looks like a 2x4 stretched across the road. So they'll hit the brakes and when their car touches the toilet paper, it goes plink. I told them all kinds of stuff like that, and I said, now, you've got some ideas to go on. Go home, and in your journal, I want you to write a multi-step process, how to play a practical joke or a prank. And I looked at the hood, and I said, that's what you had to do. Can't you do that? No. I said, honestly, you never played a joke on anybody? No. And a voice deep down in my heart spoke to me and said, Tim, the boy has tried to commit suicide twice. He's afraid. You got to have some guts. You got to have some backbone to play a practical joke or a prank. He's telling you the truth. I recognize that voice. I was raised in the church. That's the Holy Spirit. And I said, when I hear the voice of the Lord, I will pray. And the Holy Spirit said, just follow my lead. And I heard myself say, it was like I was outside of my body watching myself do something stupid. I heard myself say, toilet paper. We talked about that in class today. If you could toilet paper anybody's room in this school, who would you pick? And he said, I'd pick the science lab. And I felt myself rise up out of my chair and walk toward the door. And I turned to the door and I looked back and I said, if you think you're man enough, come on. What was I doing? This was my very first teaching assignment. I had been on the job 6 whole weeks. I was going to get fired. But I could see glints of light in his eyes deep in the recesses of that hood. I was like, okay, here we go. So we walked out in the hall and I thought, no, this is not going to happen. And I know how to get out of it. I remember in my Sunday school training, the Lord never gives you a temptation such as you're not able to bear. He always provides a way of escape. And I knew the way of escape. The custodian's closet where the toilet paper was kept would be locked. Custodians guard that stuff like it's solid gold. I have been in the teacher's bathroom and heard a radio come on in the neighboring stall. We need more toilet paper in the men's room. And you hear the return message. I'll get to that after lunch. I am in the men's restroom. It's going to be locked. No, the door is wide open. And so we left off with those little rolls. We got 3 of those great big rolls that are about the size of a truck tire like they have in the dispensers at Walmart. And we carried it down the hall, and I thought, no, there's still a way out of this. There's still a way out. The science lab, there's computers in there and all kinds of creepy crawlies in cages and stuff. They keep that locked. The door is standing wide open. The road to perdition. And I just led the way right in. And we did it up. There were ceiling tiles you can lift, so we raised those and went foo, foo, foo. I mean, it looked like the prom from the underworld. We opened up this filing cabinet, unrolled toilet paper, filled the filing cabinet full of toilet paper, wrapped all the furniture. And then when we walked out of the room, he closed the door and it slammed shut and locked. No way to go back and undo what I had just done. We went down the hall to my room and I said, okay, Hood, could you write a quick essay, a multi-step process, how to toilet paper a science lab? Yeah. He grabbed up his pencil and he was writing left-handedly. So he was doing that hooky thing where you put your elbow up like that and he was writing across the page. And I almost said, and I know it was God himself that shut my mouth. I almost said, why don't you try to write with your right hand? And that's when I noticed it. He had forgotten himself and the zipper had slipped down and he had shugged that big coat off. And when he shugged the coat off, he revealed that on his right hand he had 4 little stumps and a thumb. And it wasn't a particularly horrible handicap. I mean, you can live a full life with 4 stumps and a thumb on your right hand, unless you're in 8th grade, your dad ditched you, you've tried to commit suicide twice, and you just don't need anybody picking on you for anything else. And he had receded into that coat to hide. He finished up his essay. The handwriting was atrocious, but I managed to decipher it. And I said, look at there. You can write. I knew you could. I'm not giving you an A. You have earned an A. And I put a big A on the top of the paper. He closed his journal, put the pencil away, put it all back in his book bag, zipped his book bag shut. And just about that time, his mom walked into the room. She looked at her son, she said, what'd you do? And he said, nothing. I knew we had a pact. So I just smiled and I said, we made a little progress and I'm very anxious to work with him again tomorrow. And they went home and I went home. And the next morning when I got up and got ready to go to school, before I left the house I thought, maybe I ought to call the science teacher and give her just a little warning. So before I walked out the door, I grabbed the phone and I called the science teacher and I said, Debbie. She said, oh, you just caught me. I was getting ready to leave for school. I said, I know, me too. I just wanted you to know that when you get to school, if you beat me to school, you're going to find a surprise in your science lab, and just know that I know all about that and I'll explain it when I get there. She said, ooh, did you find me a bug? I said, oh no, it's not a bug. You just wait. And I thought, okay, she won't freak out. I've covered my bases. What I was not counting on was science teachers don't unlock schools first thing in the morning. Assistant principals do. Our assistant principal was a man named Mr. Barnes. He was about that big, and he was the meanest man you have ever met in your entire life. He could walk down the hallway of our schools and look at kids, and they would immediately go, I didn't do it, whatever it is, I didn't do it. But he could point a finger, and boys would start emptying their pockets because they knew he was looking for contraband. And we needed him because we had a criminal element in our school. When I went into my homeroom class, my kids were sitting there in front of me, and I was busy checking the roll, and all of a sudden, I heard heavy breathing at the door. It sounded like somebody let a bulldog in. And I turned, and there's Mr. Barnes. And he says, Mr. Lowry, I have a situation, and I need to see you in the hallway. Well, I had kids in my homeroom that would rob you blind. I'm serious, they would. I had a girl who, by special permission from her parole officer, came to 8th grade in her orange jumpsuit. I said, Mr. Barnes, I cannot leave these children. I was using them as a human shield. So he walked in my room, and I said, just why don't you whisper in my ear? There was no whispering. He said, Mr. Lowry, somebody broke into this school last night and toilet papered the science lab. And I looked up, and the hood is in his accustomed seat in the back row. And from deep inside that coat, I can see him going. We had a pact. I could not rat him out. And so I took a deep breath. I prayed a quick prayer, which was only 2 words. Help me. And I turned to my assistant principal and said, no. The entire room fell silent. All eyes were on me and Mr. Barnes. And he said, Mr. Lowry, did you call the science teacher and tell her you had a surprise for her? I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I did. Would you tell me what that surprise was? I looked at the hood looked at me, and I said, if I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, now would it? I thought the man would explode. Steam shooting out the sides of his head. He pulled a ruler out of his back pocket. I said, if you hit me with that, there's... No. He said, He said, no. He said, I'm not going to hit you. He bent down like that, and he said, put your foot on my knee. I said, excuse me? He said, there were shoe prints on the tables, and I'm about to measure your shoe. I looked at my orange jumpsuit, and she said, he needs a warrant for that. I said, I have it on sound legal advice that you need a warrant for that. He shoved that ruler in his back pocket. He said, I think you know more about this. You're just not willing to say. I said, I can neither confirm nor deny that statement. And he spun around and walked out. The bell rang. The hall was flooded with kids. I fished my way through the crowd, using them to get away from the principal. I went down to the science lab, and I told my friend Debbie, I said, okay, here's what happened. And I told her, and she said, that's great. You got him to write in his journal, but we can do better. All of our kids had gone off to PE in the gym. She said, run down to the gym and get Brian. So I went down to the gym and I got Brian. Now, Brian was this little 8th grader who was about that big. He had not hit his growth spurt yet, except in his mouth. He talked all the time. I remember getting so frustrated one day, I said, Brian, when you die, we're going to have to dig you up and kill your tongue. Brian came in, and she said, Brian, I'm all the time fussing at you for climbing on the furniture. Now's your chance. Climb up here and help me pull all this down. So Brian's helping us clean up this mess. And while we're cleaning up, Debbie let it slip that it was the hood who had done this. Oh no, that was good, because an hour later when Brian had blabbed it everywhere, he was hero of the 8th grade. I actually saw him going down the hallway later that day. Coat was gone. He was high-fiving people with his stumpy hand. At the time for his science class, Debbie had wrapped his chair with toilet paper so that when we walked in, there was a silent message that said, game over. At the end of the day, after I had spent another 90 minutes tutoring the hood and he had gone home, I heard somebody at my door clear their throat. It was Mr. Barnes. He said, would you please come here? Yes, sir. I got up and I walked to the door, and he was rocking on his heels. He said, toilet paper, huh? Yes, sir. It's taxpayer money, you know. Yes, sir, I know. You got him to write in his journal? Yes, we did. It's good. And then he reached out to shake my hand, but he reached out left-handed. I hesitate to tell you because I fear you'll think I'm making it up, but it's God's honest truth. Mr. Barnes was also born with 4 stubs and a thumb on his right hand. So he always shook hands left-handedly, and he reached out to shake my hand, and when I took his hand, he pulled me toward him and leaned over my shoulder and gave me sort of a masculine man hug. And he whispered in my ear and he said, you did a really good thing for that boy. And then he pushed me back, stood at attention. He said, next time, just do it in somebody else's building.